Welcome to 2819. I'm Sandra Diemez.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher.
And we have a fascinating show for you today. Lots of deep topics to unpack.
That's right. A lot of high-tech stuff going on in today's episode. In RTB 101, Krista will be speaking with astronomer Hugh Ross, asking him the question, is it possible our lives are a computer simulation?
Whoa. In Give and Take, astrophysicist Jeff Sorenk will be talking with Oxford University Professor Emeritus of Mathematics, I said it, John Lennox, and he's going to be talking with him about the fascinating topic of AI. So going back to that tech topic again.
That's right, and good job in getting the title right on that one. Yes. It's a long one. First up is Culture Talk. Sandra's going to be speaking with biochemist Fazale Rana, asking him the question, how do we love our neighbors during a pandemic? Let's check it out.
Welcome to Culture Talk, where we talk about culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with Dr. Fazale Rana, biochemist and author. And you know what, Fuzz? I'm very happy to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, as always, Sandra, it's a pleasure to hang out with you.
We're going to be talking about how to love your neighbor during a pandemic. Now, it is a hot topic, interestingly, and kind of curiously enough, because both you and I have had conversations offline about how we as Christians can demonstrate loving our neighbor. But before we dive into those specific tips, let's talk about some questions that you've received in response to some of the things that you've written and posted. So some of the questions that our constituents have asked and Christians have asked are things that we have addressed, but I think we want to address in a more concise manner. So one of the first questions they ask is, how do we even know that COVID is real?
Yeah, Sandra, I can understand why people ask that question, because in the very early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people were comparing COVID-19 to the flu. But just some statistics indicate that really they're very different diseases. First of all, we're about to celebrate the year anniversary, believe it or not, of the very first detection of COVID-19 in the United States. And in that year's time, more people have died from COVID-19 than from the flu in the last 5 years. Right now, COVID-19 is the third leading cause of death in the United States. And when we look at data from the CDC, which records excess deaths, that would be the number of deaths above the average deaths that you would expect to see in a year, compared to 2015 to 2018, that yearly average. Right now, we're looking at on the order of probably 500,000 excess deaths. 400,000 are directly attributable to COVID. Another 100,000 are indirectly attributable.
One of the questions that also came in is that God gave us immune systems to fight off such a virus, so we don't need a vaccine. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, our immune systems really are part of God's providential care for humanity, because our immune systems provide us with the means to fight off a number of different types of pathogens. And also, once we've been exposed to a pathogen, our immune system oftentimes will develop an acquired immunity, so that in the future, when we're confronted with those pathogens, we no longer even go through a disease state, as our bodies very quickly battle off those pathogens, preventing the disease from happening a second time. So vaccines are merely trying to work with what our immune system already does to give us that acquired immunity without actually going through the process of experiencing the symptoms of the disease.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's helpful. Another concern that I've heard is that the vaccine was rushed and it was done so quickly that we can't really trust it. But you've written actually a blog article about COVID-19 vaccines and God's providence and all of the years of research leading up to shifting into creating a vaccine for COVID. Can you explain very briefly what that research is?
Yeah, well, the idea of messenger RNA vaccines or viral vector vaccines, and these are two very different types of vaccines that are being developed by Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech on one hand, and then AstraZeneca and Janssen on the other hand, are vaccines that are new, that haven't really been used to a large degree in the human population. But yet these vaccines have been under development for easily 3 decades. And so we have a really good understanding of these vaccines. They were already in preclinical trials, at least the messenger RNA vaccines, before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And so just at the point that the pandemic hit, we were already progressing these mRNA vaccines into clinical trials for other viral diseases. So it's just an incredible coincidence that we had these new types of very effective, easy to develop vaccines that were ready to go when the pandemic hit. And I see that coincidence as really reflecting God's providence again.
I think that helps, because I hear that people are concerned it was just from scratch a vaccine that was created, within a few months, and they're concerned about that. There are a bunch of other concerns. One of them is that the vaccine will make women who are of childbearing age, it will make them sterile. So is there any validity to that concern?
Well, I mean, right now there's no evidence for that whatsoever. And I don't even know how you would acquire evidence for that, given that the vaccine has been available only for a matter of months. So there's no way to know that information. When we look at the mechanism for how the vaccine works, there's no reason to think the vaccine would cause infertility or sterility in either men or in women. And so that to me is really not a legitimate claim. Now, to be fair, we don't know what the safety profile is for any of the vaccines for women who are pregnant or who are breastfeeding. There's no safety data for that, for any of the vaccines that are out there. It doesn't mean that they're not safe, but that we don't have that data. So if somebody is in that category, they really should consult with their physician before they receive a vaccine. But keep in mind that women who are pregnant are much more likely to have severe cases of COVID-19 than women who are not. So pregnancy is considered, quote unquote, a comorbidity when it comes to COVID-19. So that's something else to keep in mind as well.
So how can we best demonstrate our love to our neighbors during a pandemic?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there are very simple and easy things to do, like number one, wearing a mask and wearing it properly, being cognizant about social distancing, really be thoughtful about, visiting people, who might be vulnerable or, unusually susceptible to, a really horrible outcome if they do get COVID-19. But also, I think vaccines are part of the way that we love our neighbor as ourselves. This pandemic is not going to come to an end until we attain herd immunity. And that's going to require somewhere between 70 to 80% of people receiving vaccines. And so when we receive a vaccine, not only are we protecting ourselves and protecting those people we love, we're protecting everybody that we interact with, even casually. And so it really is an act of love towards others when we are willing to be vaccinated. Think about this. There are going to be people who cannot tolerate the vaccine. It's a very low number, 1 in about 100,000, who will develop such a severe allergic reaction that they'll go into anaphylactic shock. And we have an idea of what groups of people those are. So it doesn't mean the vaccine is unsafe. It just means that there's some people that can't tolerate it. Other people are not going to attain immunity even if they are vaccinated, because again, it's a 90% effectiveness rate for the best vaccines. That means 10% of the people will not attain immunity even if they are vaccinated. And so we need to think about the fact that there are these people who cannot receive the vaccine, who can't get that protection. And the only way they'll be protected from COVID-19 is through herd immunity. So the way we can love those people is to do our part and to be vaccinated.
Thank you so much for that, Fuzz. I think that was really informative. And I hope that if those who are watching are still curious or concerned about COVID and about vaccines, go to reasons.org and search for COVID-19 vaccines and God's providence to check out Fuzz's blog, and then also search reputable sites like the CDC.
Now it's time for RTB 101, where we discuss practical questions to equip you to share your faith more effectively. And here to help me talk about a very provocative topic today is astronomer Dr. Hugh Ross. Welcome, Hugh.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you know, from time to time, I hear this question. I thought it would make a great segment because you had a recent blog post about it too. And that is, how do we know that our lives aren't some kind of sophisticated computer simulation? Could this be like the movie, The Matrix? I'm hoping you can help us think this through a little bit. I don't even know where to begin, so maybe you can help me with that.
Well, if you watch the movie The Matrix, there was actually tests there to determine whether they were taking the blue pill or the red pill. And so I begin my article by basically saying, one simple test is just punch someone really hard in a sensitive spot and see if they yell. See if there's a pain response, see if there's a bruise there, and does the bruise go away immediately or does it stay? Does the pain remain? But I think a much kinder, I'm not recommending that, but a much
We're not recommending
kinder
violence in this
No,
segment.
not at all. Is basically to point out, there is strong evidence that we have free will, we have theory of mind, which means we're aware of what's going on in our own mind, and we can affect what's going on in our own mind by our actions and thoughts. Moreover, we have the capacity to detect what other people are feeling and thinking, not always accurately, but the very fact that we have some capacity to do that, what philosophers call theory of mind, indicates that we really are free will beings. And as a scientist, I look at the fact that we humans are compulsively curious, not just curious about things that would enhance our well-being, but curious about things that would actually damage our well-being. I mean, you think of the exploits that people go to just to explore distant places or go to the moon. People are willing to take quite high risks in order to satisfy their curiosity where there's no personal benefit that comes back to them. Moreover, we humans are compulsively curious about everything, not just about what's going on our planet, but our solar system, our galaxy, the entire universe, and what might actually exist beyond the universe. So this puts us completely outside of any kind of computer simulation, because all computer simulations have boundaries or limits. And we notice is our free will is exercised in such a way that appears there's no boundaries or limits to how we express our curiosity and how we try to satisfy our curiosity.
Well, that's good. And I'm going to kind of summarize a couple of really important points that you made there. One is this issue of self-awareness. It's not only that I see what's happening around me, but I have an awareness of my own internal thoughts that nobody else has access to. And you see that as an evidence of that we live in a real world and not a computer simulation. I think the second thing I heard you talk about there is curiosity, this need to explore and even sometimes to put ourselves in harm's way because we're curious. And so you see that as evidence. I wonder if we could go back though to your first example, the kind of the almost silly example of hitting someone, but that kind of gets to a bigger issue is that I'm thinking about, historically speaking, there was this error known as Gnosticism in the early church that kind of was this idea of denying almost that the physical world was real. It was more like an illusion, and what was really real was the spirit realm. This idea of whether or not we're a computer simulation almost strikes me as a form of Gnosticism.
Well, it is. And, we came up with a silly example of, say, punching someone in the nose. That's just one of millions of examples we can give of experiments we can perform to determine whether or not we're engaging a real physical world or just an illusion. And when we do that, we discover there are laws of physics and that matter is real. We can see it's composed of particles. We recognize energy. So the whole pursuit of science tells us we're engaging a real world. Our science experiments would go in a completely different direction if there is no physicality to our existence. So there is a real physical world, in spite of what the Gnostics were teaching thousands of years ago. And by the way, the Gnostics are still here. There are many different cults that are still practicing a Gnostic worldview.
I think that one of the distinctive features then that we should probably highlight of the Christian worldview is that we believe in that the physical world is real, that
Right.
we can study it, we can look at it, we can be curious about it, but that also the spirit realm is real, that the realm of the triune God and demons and angels in heaven and hell, that we hold to both of these realms as being real. That's a very important feature of our framework.
It is, and as a scientist, I think we actually have the power to do measurements and experiments that tell us there's not only a reality to the universe, there's a reality to a realm beyond the universe. So the fact that we can explore all the way to the boundaries of the space-time universe, we can see that there's a beginning. It tells us that cause and effect was responsible for bringing the universe into existence. Therefore, there must be causality beyond the universe. I mean, we have the space-time theorems, which rigorously establish there must be a reality beyond this universe. So we're not only able to determine this universe in which we live is real, our bodies are real, our minds are real, but there's a reality beyond what we can measure within this universe.
Thanks, Hugh. You gave us some good things to think about on this very common question and just giving us your take from a astronomer's perspective. And I want to encourage everyone, go check out Hugh's blog. You can search for Today's New Reason to Believe for a written version of this conversation.
Hello, Jeff Zwerink here, and welcome to Give and Take. In this segment of our show, we explore important scientific ideas and help you be more convinced of the truth of Christianity. I'm joined again by Dr. John Lennox, Professor Emeritus of Mathematics at Oxford University, and we're going to be just talking about the topic of artificial intelligence. Dr. Lennox, it's good to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
So I know this is something you've thought about because you've written a book about artificial intelligence. And I guess I just want to ask you to start the conversation off. How close do you think we are to developing artificial intelligence?
Well, there are two kinds of artificial intelligence. And the first one we have already developed. And it's being used all around the world, particularly in terms of pattern recognition. We're using it, for example, in order to develop a vaccine for COVID-19. It's being used, sadly, to oppress people through facial recognition technology. So there's loads of stuff that's actually being used, and we call that narrow artificial intelligence. That is a system which does one thing that normally requires human intelligence. The system is not intelligent, but it simulates intelligence. The second sort is artificial general intelligence. And that's the kind that you're referring to when you say, are we near to that? The development of a super intelligent being, either by enhancing already existing human intelligence by various methods of cyborg engineering or biogenetic engineering, or constructing a superintelligence from scratch that is independent of biology and is rooted in something like silicon. That's the science fiction type stuff. And in my view, listening carefully to the pundits, we're much further away from it than a lot of people like to think.
Yeah, well, I like that distinction you made, because there is a lot of talk about, oh, we've got artificial intelligence doing this and that, to recognize that there are two very different things. There are machines or programs or whatever you want to call them that are very capable of doing specific things. I mean, the computer programs that can outplay humans routinely at chess. So there are these, I think the term you used is artificial narrow intelligence, but when I think of artificial intelligence, I'm thinking that general intelligence, the the things that we see, like the Terminator in the movies, or you know, all the different sci-fi things out there. So you think that's quite a long ways away. Different question about that. When we develop it, let's say we do develop it, is this going to be a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, nobody knows, and that is the huge concern. The leading people like the late Stephen Hawking or Elon Musk and all this kind of folks, they're so concerned about it that they're trying to set up ethical beliefs and norms that must be applied in thinking about this. But that's extremely difficult because the technology inevitably outpaces the ethics. And so we just don't know. And if you read somebody like Max Tegmark, who's a physicist at Princeton, he, in his book, gives you a whole lot of scenarios that the superintelligence could be benevolent, or it might, on the other end of the scale, be a despot and treat human beings as pets or eliminate them altogether. And how do you police that kind of thing? And of course, science fiction writers love that kind of stuff. But what intrigues me is that there are people of high intelligence, like our astronomer royal, Lord Martin Rees, who really thinks we're going to go so far that in years to come, that intelligence will have been so changed that there'll be no recognition of what the beings that then exist will have been. And of course, the big issue it all raises is, what are we doing to the concept of a human being? That's something Lewis thought about in the 1940s in two of his books, The Abolition of Man and That Hideous Strength. And again, presciently, he saw that one of the major problems was, if we start to alter the definition or the specification of a human being, like, for example, altering the germline, what we're creating is not humans, but artifacts. And they will be specified not by everybody or democratically, but by a small group of scientists. And so ultimately, it will be, as he put it, the abolition of man. And I think we need to think about that, because there's so much of this stuff in the atmosphere. So that's why I interact very strongly with the book Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari, the Israeli historian, who is a transhumanist and is advocating this artificial enhancement of human beings to turn them into gods, as he puts it, Greek-style gods.
Yeah, well, so your description there, I mean, you're talking about what do we do with ethics? What does it mean to be intelligent? What are humans? Those are all concepts that are foundational to a Judeo-Christian worldview. It seems like Christianity intersects very strongly with our desire to want to develop artificial intelligence. How as Christians do we think about this in a way that we're helping advance the good of humanity while we're looking at this technology?
I was intrigued recently watching Jordan Peterson. He has certain lectures on Genesis, and he was talking on Genesis 1 and came across the statement, and God made human beings in his own image. And he said, man, that's the cornerstone of civilization. We neglect it at our peril. And I think that's exactly it, that here's a specification of the significance of a human being, and it's related to God. And in that very same part of the Bible, we have the first attack on humanity, where the temptation was, you know, God's trying to keep you humans down. He doesn't want you to rise to your potential. He knows in the day you eat that forbidden fruit, you shall be as gods. And here's the Homo Deus. And the lie that's been spread around for all the millennia subsequent to that is that God is out to spoil your enjoyment. And he doesn't want you to have knowledge and all the rest of it. And so I think it's very important to analyze those particular passages in Genesis that are utterly foundational and see that they say nothing of the kind. God wants knowledge. The original garden was full of it. And the tree that was forbidden is not the tree of knowledge, it's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And as we see from there, it's not knowledge that you want at all. And I think Peterson is onto something there, that we need to realize that this mandate, so to speak, is really the foundation of all our legal system, our human rights, and all the rest of. They come as a gift from the Judeo-Christian worldview. And therefore, we need to apply them in the context of thinking about the various artificial intelligence scenarios.
You know, what I find interesting in your description there is, even going back to the serpent in the garden, is there are all of these misunderstandings of who God is and what he wants for humanity that we tend to, Adam and Eve rejected what the serpent was bringing, and we're tending to reject what we think Christianity has to say, but we really almost don't even understand what God is and what he's wanting to do. How, as Christians, do we help people see that better?
Well, the way I do it, frankly, is to be pretty blunt with people. And I say, look, you and I are trying to understand the Christian faith, what it says. Well, please listen to what it has to say before you judge it. There's a great deal of what one might call biblical illiteracy in our society. And if people don't hear the big picture, they will misunderstand it. And I feel we've got a very important calling to make these things clear, especially these fundamental things that have to do with the definition of what is a human being, have to do with creation and all the major biblical doctrines. Please listen to an explanation before you cast it all away.
I think that's a powerful reminder, John. I appreciate that. Christianity does have a lot to say about how this world operates. And quite honestly, a lot of people are just rejecting it, not because of what Christianity says, but because of their perception of it. And so I think it's important that we are equipped to be able to help people understand Christianity. One of the resources that will help you do that, specifically in the area of artificial intelligence, is John Lennox's book about artificial intelligence. It's 2084. Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity. Would encourage you to go out to 2084book.com, pick up the book, read it, be equipped to be able to talk about this fascinating topic and how it really does point to the truth of Christianity.
That does it for us this week on 2019. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that it helps equip you to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And we talked about a lot of really wild topics. So we hope that you have learned a lot. And if you have any questions, that you'll leave them in the comments and you'll subscribe to the show. Also find us on social media, right?
That's right. At 2819 Show, we are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
Yep.
Just type us in the Google, right?
Yes.
Also, if you would like the podcast version of the show, you can get it on most major podcast services. Just search Reasons to Believe podcast.
See you next week.
Bye.